Welcome back to Women Writers in Chinese History. In this video, we'll continue to learn about China's only emperor Wu Zetian after she gradually rose to the pinnacle of power. During Wu Zetian's reign as the empress, one major political event was the establishment of the crown prince. After marrying Gaozong, Wu Zetian is a very fertile woman and gave birth to 4 sons and 2 daughters. We have mentioned the death of her first daughter. As to her sons, the crown prince was by default her oldest son Li Hong, who was born shortly after she entered Gaozong's palace. Li Hong had a benevolent personality and seems to have offended Empress by showing too much sympathy to the daughters of Wu Zetian's past palace rival, Consort Xiao, since these girls had been locked up and remained unmarried even in their 20s. There have been statements in various sources asserting that Wu Zetian poisoned Li Hong to death because she was unsatisfied with his behaviors. However, even though the crown prince died prematurely at the age of 23, it seems that he had been suffering from some chronic conditions, and there wasn't much evidence about Empress Wu murdering her own son. As to her second son, Li Xian, he was established as the crown prince after the death of his brother. However, his relations with Empress Wu became tense, and there were rumors during the time that his mother was actually Empress Wu's sister. Empress Wu claimed him as her own son in order to cover up the affair between her sister and the emperor. Later, Empress Wu also suspected Li Xian of treason. She consequently demoted him and banished him to a remote province. Several years later, at the age of 29, the banished prince was forced to commit suicide by the order of a messenger sent by Empress Wu. After the second son's demotion, Empress Wu's third son, Li Xian, became the crown prince and inherited the throne after Gaozong's death in 683. However, Empress Wu, now the Empress Dowager, had practically ruled the court for the past 2 decades and had imperial power firmly in her control. Li Xian was very fond of his wife Lady Wei, and once said that he'd be fine passing the throne to Lady Wei's father. Empress Wu was offended by this remark and deprived Li Xian of the title of the emperor, banishing him outside the capital. Yet both he and his wife, Lady Wei, would make a comeback, as we'll see. Finally, Empress Wu appointed her youngest son, her 4th son Li Dan, as the emperor. Li Dan was practically put in house arrest as the emperor, while Empress Wu enjoyed ultimate authority at the court. There were several large-scale military coups against her during this time, but she successfully suppressed all of them. And the puppet emperor, her son Li Dan, continued to express loyalty to her. Li Dan served as Empress Wu's puppet emperor for 6 years, from 684 to 690. In 690, at the age of 67, Wu Zetian felt that the time was mature for her to claim the title of the emperor. She thus dethroned her 4th son and established her own dynasty. Deliberately, Wu Zetian named her new dynasty Zhou, referring back to Western Zhou, the golden age of sagely rulers in Confucian historical narratives. Even as a woman, she felt that she embodied the mandate of heaven and was comparable to the greatest emperors in Chinese history. Wu Zetian's Zhou dynasty lasted about 15 years. Throughout her rise to power over half a century, as the empress for 28 years, the Empress Dowager for 7 years, and finally the emperor for 15 years, her reign was characterized by several overarching themes. First, it was her siding with officials of commoner backgrounds against old aristocratic forces. This was partly owing to her political calculations in terms of securing new supporters. However, many sources indicate that she had a true appreciation for talents and indeed discovered many capable officials. She also promoted the employment of the civil examination system for selecting civil officials and created martial examinations for selecting military officers. These legacies were inherited by later emperors and dynasties with enduring influences. Next, a particularly negative facet of her reign was her fostering of secret police to crack down opposing forces, especially in the 690s when she first took over the imperial throne. This created a reign of terror and a political culture of false accusations and forced confessions. The most notorious historical figure sponsored by her in this manner was Lai Junchen, who supposedly invented many unimaginably excruciating manners of torture and framed and executed many innocent people. Later, Wu Zetian realized the political mistake she had made by enabling men like Lai Junchen. She ordered the execution of Lai Junchen in 697, and this reign of terror that lasted for about a decade came to an end. Wu Zetian also promoted Buddhism in significant ways. If you still remember, Wu Zetian's mother, Madame Yang, was a devoted Buddhist. Madame Yang lived up to her 90s and died in 670. She had a tremendous influence on Wu Zetian even after she became the empress. Through her mother, Wu Zetian had a deep affinity with Buddhism. We have also mentioned that Buddhism in general introduced more equal gender relations into Chinese culture and allowed for more fluid identity categories. From a certain Buddhist scripture, Wu Zetian discovered a story of a woman becoming a king. She then propagated the story and portrayed herself as a living Buddhist deity. She also ordered the construction of giant Buddhist statues after her own image. So whereas we didn't have a portrait about her from her lifetime, we might imagine how she looked like by these imposing Buddhist statues. Then, as China's only woman emperor, did Wu Zetian do anything to promote women's status? One of her most enduring legacy on this regard was to prolong the mourning period for one's mother to the same length as for one's father. Previously, the latter was 3 years, whereas the former was 1 year. These mourning rituals were of fundamental significance to the Confucian principle of filial piety, and they were practiced in a very serious manner in the transitional period. During the mourning period, one was supposed to retire from all public and social life to focus on commemorating the deceased parent and tending his or her grave, something that's hard to imagine in the context of modern life. During the later dynasties, even though Wu Zetian would be perceived in a highly negative light in the mainstream culture, this legacy of mourning the passing of one's mother for 3 years, on par with one's father, was preserved. And as what had happened, even prime ministers were pressed to retire from their posts when facing the mourning duties for the deceased mother. Wu Zetian also employed a number of literate women in the palace as her confidants and secretaries. Shangguan Wan'er, who we'll learn about next, is the most famous case. However, it should be pointed out that the woman emperor seemed to have never entertained the idea of letting women participate in civil examinations or appointing female court officials. This was probably because the general female literacy of the period was low. However, this scenario of a civil examination for women under her reign would be written about in fantasy novels produced many centuries later. We'll discuss that later. During and after her lifetime, the example of Wu Zetian encouraged the women in the imperial family to make their own bid for power. Indeed, for a period of time, women's aggressive claims for political power seemed to be normalized. After Wu Zetian, Lady Wei, the wife of her third son Li Xian, and Lady Wei's daughter Princess Anle, planned to be the next woman emperor, yet they failed. Wu Zetian's second daughter, the famous Princess Taiping, had the same ambition. Yet even though Wu Zetian believed that Princess Taiping took after her the most, the princess did not succeed either in her later competition for power. Here is the image of Wu Zetian's second daughter, Princess Taiping, in various TV dramas. Finally, how to treat her relationship with the Li royal family was a consistent preoccupation of Wu Zetian's during her rise to power. On the one hand, by the fact that she ruthlessly cracked down supporters of the Li royal house to establish her own dynasty, she obviously yearned for an independence as the son of heaven. On the other hand, those in line for the throne were after all her own sons, and she faced a crisis of succession as a woman. For a while, it seemed that she contemplated on passing the throne to the Wu family, and she placed several relatives from her birth family in crucial positions, including the sons of the brothers who used to mistreat her and her mother. Yet, in the end, she felt that after all, sons were closer to her than nephews, and gave up on the idea. In 705, Wu Zetian was in her 80s, and her health was failing. Upon this juncture, courtiers became increasingly unsatisfied with the growing political influences of her male favorites, the Zhang brothers. After she became the emperor, Wu Zetian took attractive young men into her inner palace, just like what an emperor would do with young women. The Zhang brothers, Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Zongchang, were her favorites during the last few years of her life, even though these young men became increasingly daring in inserting themselves into imperial affairs. Finally, in 705, in the name of removing Wu Zetian from the bad influences of the Zhang brothers, a number of courtiers and generals initiated the coup of the year Shenlong. The Zhang brothers were killed in the process, and Wu Zetian was forced to give the throne back to Li Xian, the third son she dethroned 15 years ago. The Tang dynasty was thus restored. Shortly after the coup of Shenlong, Wu Zetian passed away due to illness, ending a legendary life as China's only woman emperor. As a strategic move before her passing, she requested to return to her position as Gaozong's empress and be buried with her husband, who passed away more than 2 decades ago. Was she conceding to male power after all? We're not sure. However, by making this move, she got to enjoy a peaceful afterlife in the mausoleum where she and Gaozong were buried. This mausoleum, known as Qianling, remained intact up to today. The final mystery Wu Zetian left to later generations was her wordless study. It's been the custom for all people of status to carve a study bearing narratives on their lives as their tombstones. The tomb studies for emperors were especially grand. However, whereas Wu Zetian had a giant study to her own, no narratives about her life were inscribed on it. For that, there were many theories. Some felt that she was guilty and ashamed, yet others felt that she's making a statement that no words could express her achievements. Another opinion is that she decided that, due to her unconventional deeds, the later generation's judgments would be so diverse, and it's better to let everyone form their own opinions. Finally, it's also plausible that the worldly status of the study reflects the hesitations of her son, the new emperor who took over the throne, as he had a difficult time characterizing his mother. To begin with, it's unclear whether she should be referred to as the empress or the emperor. During the transitional period, especially after the Song dynasty, assessments about Empress Wu were largely negative, as we can tell from the steady demonization of her image in historical sources compiled later. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, she also unfortunately became the subject of several widely circulated pornographic novels. For male readers of the period, they became more fascinated with her sexuality than with her as a political figure. However, in the 19th century, we do have an interesting novel titled Flowers in the Mirror, 镜花缘, featuring the image of Empress Wu. This novel begins with an account of Wu Zetian's touring of the imperial garden after she had become the emperor. According to the story, while being drunk, the woman emperor ordered all flowers to bloom despite it was winter time. The flower spirits bloomed according to her order, yet by doing so they violated the rule of heaven. Thus, they were banished to the mortal world. The novel then traces the travel of a scholar overseas, who throughout his travels encountered the incarnations of the flower spirits and witnessed the amazing talents they are capable of. Finally, the novel, after 100 chapters, ends with a military coup that dethrones the fictional Wu Zetian, and her summoning of all flower spirits to participate in the civil examination for women. All in all, Flowers in the Mirror reflects a conflicting gender perspective, since it both places Wu Zetian in a negative light as someone who has perverted a fundamental law of nature, and uses her image as a backdrop for imagining female talents that have been obscured and buried in the given cultural system. In the modern period, Wu Zetian remains a household name, but mostly through TV dramas, in which her stories are often painted in a sensational manner. Historically speaking, whatever dramas had happened in her personal life, Wu Zetian's decades of reign bridged two eras famed for social and economic prosperity in Tang history. The reign of Zhen Guan under Taizong Li Shimin and the reign of Kai Yuan under Xuanzong Li Longji, one of her grandsons. One would imagine that she deserved some credits in managing the dynasty during the decades in between, enabling a sustained period of economic and cultural growth that contributed to one of the best-known golden ages in Chinese history. And did Wu Zetian leave behind any writings? There's actually a widely known poem that's attributed to her. Let's take a look. 看朱成碧思纷纷，憔悴之离为忆君。不信比来长下泪，开箱验取石榴裙。I watch the pink turn into green, my thoughts a tangled mess. Racked by pain, a bag of bones, all because of love for you. If you do not believe how many tears I have cried of late, open the chest and look at my skirt dyed red by tears of blood. This is a beautifully written, though quite conventional love poem in the voice of a lovesick woman. At the end, she artfully articulates her tearfulness in recent days by suggesting her lover to take a look at her tear-stained garment. This poem by itself may look quite stereotypical, and we can't guarantee its authenticity. However, a story has been that Wu Zetian wrote this poem to the Gaozong Emperor when she was in the nunnery. If this story were true, then it certainly paved the first stepping stone for China's only woman emperor on her long journey to supreme power. There is also a Buddhist hymn attributed to Empress Wu as the opening of the widely circulated Avatamsaka Sutra, Hua Yan Jing. If it was authentic, it could tell us something about Wu Zetian's deep affinity with Buddhism. 无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We're now permitted to see it, to listen to it, to accept and hold it. May we truly understand the meaning of the Tathagata's words. Finally, even if Wu Zetian didn't leave behind many poems, she forged the literary culture that gave rise to China's golden age of poetry, represented by great poets such as Li Bai, Du Fu, and Wang Wei. Also notable is her lifelong secretary Shangguan Wan'er, who became the literary authority during and after the reign of Wu Zetian, and was a prominent political figure herself. We will discuss her story next.